The World Bank is an international financial institution that provides loans and grants to the governments of low and middle-income countries for the purpose of pursuing capital projects. The World Bank is the collective name for the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development and the International Development Association, two of 5 international organizations owned by the World Bank Group. From 1990 through 2004, the proportion of people living in extreme poverty fell from almost a third to less than a fifth. Although results vary widely within regions and countries, the trend indicates that the world as a whole can meet the goal of halving the percentage of people living in poverty. Africa's poverty, however, is expected to rise, and most of the 36 countries where 90% of the world's undernourished children live are in Africa. The president of the bank is the president of the entire World Bank Group. The president is responsible for chairing meetings of the boards of directors and for overall management of the bank. Traditionally, the president of the bank has always been a U.S. citizen nominated by the United States, the largest shareholder in the bank. The changes were brought about with the goal of making voting more universal in regards to standards, rule-based with objective indicators, and transparent among other things. Additionally, voting power is based on economic size in addition to the International Development Association contributions. World Bank organizes the Development Marketplace Awards, a grant program that surfaces and funds development projects with potential for development impact that are replicable. The grant beneficiaries are social enterprises with projects that aim to deliver social and public services to groups with the lowest incomes. As a guideline to the World Bank's operations in any particular country, a country assistance strategy is produced in cooperation with the local government and any interested stakeholders and may rely on analytical work performed by the bank or other parties. The World Bank collects and processes large amounts of data and generates them on the basis of economic models. These data and models have gradually been made available to the public in a way that encourages reuse, whereas the recent publications describing them are available as open access under a Creative Commons Attribution license. By the late 1980s, some international organizations began to believe that structural adjustment policies were worsening life for the world's poor, due to a reduction in social spending and an increase in the price of food, as subsidies were lifted. These nations have a valid system of governmental checks and balances, an independent judiciary whose decisions are enforced, governments that function adequately, and diverse and independent media. These nations have only limited problems in democratic functioning. These nations can have significant faults in other democratic aspects, including underdeveloped political culture, low levels of participation in politics, and issues in the functioning of governance. In fact, this was not a new experience for the former two, which suffered from the Eurozone crisis many years before. By contrast, Malta was downgraded from a full democracy to a flawed democracy. Almost 70% of countries covered by the Democracy Index recorded a decline in their overall score, as most of them imposed lockdowns and other restrictions in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, in addition to some arresting journalists and citizens accused of spreading COVID-19 misinformation. The global average score fell to its lowest level since the index began in 2006. The devastation of World War II resulted in a massive recovery program involving the rebuilding of industrial plants, housing, and transportation, as well as the demobilization and migration of millions of soldiers and civilians. A successful peer production enterprise must have low-cost integration, the mechanism by which the modules are integrated into a whole end product. Thus, integration must include both quality controls over the modules and a mechanism for integrating the contributions into the finished product at relatively low cost.
There are more than 350 million indigenous people living in 90 countries. They represent 5,000 different cultures and speak the great majority of the thousands of languages that are spoken around the world today. Indigenous communities often have distinct beliefs, culture, and customs. Many indigenous people still live in very close contact with the land, with a respect for and understanding of their natural surroundings. Indigenous peoples are not the dominant groups in the societies they live in. The dominant groups are the people that arrived later. This means that indigenous peoples have suffered from many problems related to a lack of economic power, social protection, and political representation. They are more likely to have limited access to healthcare and education, and members of indigenous communities live shorter lives than non-indigenous groups. Their languages are not normally taught in schools, and many of these languages are in danger of disappearing. Many indigenous peoples do not have control over their land. Governments and companies take their land to cut down trees, to farm cows, or for other activities that use these natural resources and damage the environment. This often forces indigenous people to leave their land, losing their ancestral homes and their source of wealth and food. Making sure indigenous peoples have legal rights over their land and resources is a matter of human rights. It also brings environmental benefits to the planet. Deforestation rates in Bolivia, Brazil and Colombia were 2 to 3 times lower in forests officially belonging to indigenous communities. Importantly, the Declaration defends indigenous peoples' right to make decisions about the use and protection of their ancestral land. It also sets out many rights, including indigenous peoples' rights to education and healthcare, participation in political and legal processes, and the protection of indigenous languages. Go online to find out the National Anti-Trafficking Hotline number and to discover which anti-trafficking groups are in your local community. Be alert. If you hear about someone, especially a young person, who has been offered employment in another city or country that seems too good to be true, friends come in all shapes and sizes. They may be someone we met as a child, a classmate at school, someone we met at work or through other friends. They may be friends who live at a distance in another country or virtual friends we've made online. Whoever they are, however we met them, there is a special connection based on a shared history and interests, enjoying doing things together or simply talking and understanding each other. Friends are there to help us at difficult times and to celebrate the good times. Doctors say that friends are very important for both our physical and mental health at all stages in life. But friends are not only important on an individual level. Friendship can also be important on a global level. Friendships that cross borders can help bring peace and avoid war. Learning to think of other people, people who are different from us, as our friends helps us work together to build a culture of peace. The International Day of Friendship on the 30th of July is not the only day celebrating friendship around the world. A number of countries also celebrate on the 30th of July, but other countries have different dates. For example, Argentina, Brazil and Spain celebrate Friends Day on the 20th of July, while in India and the US, they celebrate it on the first Sunday in August. Wherever it's celebrated, the celebrations are very similar. Friends meet up to spend time together. They may eat out or have a meal at home. They give each other small gifts, books, flowers, simple jewelry such as a friendship band. Some people send each other cards and greetings online. Emoji is the fastest growing language in history. 5 billion emojis are sent every day just on Facebook Messenger. They're appearing in some surprising places too. One court judge in England used a smiley face emoji smiley in a document to make it easy to explain the court's decision to children.